Singapore's fertility rate fell below the level needed to keep the population steady for the first time. We have Dr. Jennifer Sciubba from Population Reference Bureau to tell us more. Dr. Jennifer, what's happening in Singapore that could be causing this population drop?
Well, it's important to put Singapore in a larger context because around the world, we have seen a tremendous decline in the average number of children born per woman. Those rates of population growth have been falling since the 1960s. So, if we're very zoomed out, Singapore just looks like part of this overall pattern. But when we do zoom into Singapore, and in fact, the East Asian region generally, we see that this is a region of the world with the lowest total fertility rates. And part of what is driving that is that people are getting married later, if at all. They're having their first child later, if at all. And overall, people just want to have fewer children. There are quite a few reasons that we can go into as to why that happens, but some of them are economic, some of them are related to value shifts.
And how are these trends affecting population policies?
Well, governments have really scrambled to try and figure out how they can raise fertility rates. And so there are a few approaches that they have taken. One of them is to treat it as an economic issue. And so governments have tried to do things such as give tax breaks or even cash bonuses to families for having children. They've also made some strides in instituting parental leave, such as Singapore has done. But these have had really mixed results. And I think part of that is that they don't, they treat population and low fertility as if it's just one or two reasons why people are having fewer children, when really it's a very complex decision to have a child, or when and how many children to have. And so when you have these siloed policies, such as an economic approach, then that may not get to every reason that is holding someone back from starting a family. And part of why people are not having children around the world, as many as they had in the past, is that there's a lot of pessimism about the future. That's hard to capture in a population policy. But I also wonder if governments ever really had quite as much control over population as they might have thought that they did. We know that in the past, when fertility rates were high, governments would put into place policies around education, particularly education for women. They would make sure that there was rights-based family planning available, and they would really work to get more women opportunities to earn income outside the home. We certainly saw this happen in Singapore. Education played a huge role. But we also know that even in places that maybe didn't have all of those policies, fertility rates still went down. And I think governments are experiencing a crisis right now of their own making, where they're making all this effort towards raising fertility rates and it's not working, and they're very puzzled by that.
So, Dr. Jennifer, what policies can address the decline without reinforcing traditional gender roles?
It is incredibly important that governments actually center gender in their population policies, because otherwise, we really risk actually putting even more pressure on women. We end up with a situation that I think is quite common in countries today, where population is seen as a problem, and therefore the solution seems to be to target women. We're asking women to work more, to have more babies, and to care for an increasingly aged population. But we might have one ministry that is focused on bringing more women into the workforce, and then maybe another ministry that is thinking more about gender equality, and maybe a separate policy that is thinking about parental leave. Really, all of these things need to be discussed together, because one policy could actually have unintended effects on another. And so I think that's why it's really important, the types of things that the Singapore Council on Women's Organizations is doing with its Summit for Action on Gender Equality, is bringing all of those different stakeholders into the same room to talk about this. So concretely, one thing we would want to do is think about how we can use policies to actually change norms around gender. It's one thing for a government to encourage or even mandate paternity leave, asking men to take leave after having children. But if it is very uneven with the amount that the mother of the child would get, and it's perhaps not socialized as much. We can't get our corporations on board with saying this is normal and it's expected and it is for a long time, then it's just a baby step and it won't actually have that much of an effect on alleviating some of that care burden that mothers will feel. So that's one really important thing that we can do. I think another thing that we would want to do is to make sure that there are women represented in policymaking. And Singapore has made a lot of strides in terms of its gender equality, but that is one area where there's really a lot more work to be done. That could look like putting more women in ministerial positions, for example. And what that would do is it would be another part of this more nuanced and comprehensive approach to thinking about population policies that makes sure that one policy wouldn't have an unintended effect to actually put more pressure on women.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights, Dr. Jennifer.
Thank you.
Once again, that was Dr. Jennifer Sciubba, President and CEO of Population Reference Bureau. For more news, visit sbr.com.sg.